So I remember the night my daughter ran away. I do not remember why she ran away. She was about 5 or 6, I think about that old. She announced to us she was running away from home. She was going to run to a neighbor's house, run away to a neighbor's house, who had 3 little girls of their own. And she announced that to us all. Maybe she was tired of the rules or felt controlled or whatever, but she announced that one evening that she was running away. I think I have some vague memory of her saying, well, it's because y'all are mean. And at first she said she was going to run away to her grandmother's house. And my wife, Teresa, says, well, if you think I'm mean, wait till you go to Grandma's. My wife's not known for her diplomatic skills. But ever practical Emma, she had a tiny little suitcase she had. Ever practical Emma began to stuff as many of her clothes into the suitcase as she possibly could. And it was kind of to bursting. You really couldn't zip it up. But before she took off, she decided that she was going to give her toys to her brother, who was a few years older. And so she'd grab a toy and go in to see him and say, I'm running away, here's my toys, and I love you. Which my son, again, a few years older, he kind of understood that we weren't really going to let him run away, but he began to get distraught and shed a few tears, in fact, which surprised me considering their relationship at the time. But she would take a toy to him and leave it and say, I'm running away. So I remember that night as she walked out the door to go to a neighbor, walk across our lawn to go to the neighbor's house, clothes kind of falling out of the suitcase as she goes along. And my wife and I watched from the front window, kept an eye on her. And she knocked on the door, and we saw the neighbor open the door, and we didn't hear this conversation, but I'm imagining it went something like this. She says, well, I've run away from home, and I've come to live with you. And we could tell the puzzlement on the neighbor's face. I'm sure he said something like, honey, I have way too many kids as it is. So, and then she started returning home. Now, Emma, ever prideful, held her head up high and walked right straight to our house, and as we opened the door, held her head high and said, I'll run away another day. And I never really understood why she wanted to run away. And I'm sure each and every one of you can probably share a story of you running away or your kids running away, but that does seem to be a human experience, this desire to run away as fast as you can. The story of Jonah is a really interesting one. We got to remember it's thousands of years old, and we might look at that story as a kind of Hebrew fable, a Hebrew myth, a story to convey wisdom and some idea about God. It's an odd story, but the best way I would describe the story of Jonah is that really it's a mystery. It is a mystery. Because we have no idea right now why Jonah runs away from the presence of God. Why over and over in the story it says Jonah fleeing the presence of the Lord. Now we'll find out chapter 3 and chapter 4 what was really going through Jonah's mind. We'll be talking about that in the next week or two. But at this point, the mystery of the story goes, the word of the Lord came to Jonah and said, go to Nineveh and denounce its wickedness. And the first thing Jonah does is he runs away as fast as he can. He runs down to Joppa, a seaport, books a trip on the boat to Tarshish, and takes off. And we have no idea why. Why run away from God? And you know the rest of the story. The storm comes up. The boat is beginning to be rocked back and forth. So much so that it's about to sink. The sailors are all upset, wondering what's happening. They're throwing cargo off the ship, trying to save the ship. And then what the most oddest, weirdest detail in this story, what does Jonah do? He goes down into the hold of the ship and takes a nap. That's an inappropriate response to your ship about to sink, to go down into the hold and take a nap. But if you think about it, all he's doing is running away in his head, right? I don't know about you, but when I feel stress, anxiety, fear, a lot of times I run away by taking a nap. The captain shakes him awake and says, what are you doing down here? And, you need to pray to your God. And we know as the story unfolds, the sailors cast lots and they discover, it was Jonah's fault that their ship is about to sink. And they ask who Jonah is, and he had already told them that he had booked the ship because I'm fleeing the presence of the Lord God. And to their credit, they try rowing the boat. It was interesting. They try rowing the boat back to land, but God won't let it happen. The storm tosses them. Finally, Jonah says, "Throw me overboard, and you'll be safe." And they try. And they throw him overboard, and the storm stops. Jonah is the ultimate runaway, fleeing the presence of God. Years ago, before I began in ministry, I was exploring with a pastor, mentor, friend of mine, who, as I was thinking about becoming a minister, as I had this sense of a burgeoning sense of call to serve as a minister, as a pastor. And that pastor mentor said something to me I'll never forget. What he said to me was, as I tried to kind of explore those feelings and what it was, he says, "This is what I'll tell you to do. Run away as fast as you can. And if you can't get away, then you know it's a call." It's interesting. It's an odd thing, but we humans flee the presence of God all the time, don't we? It's kind of an odd thing, in part because God, that source of love and grace and forgiveness, that source of home, that we know, but yet somehow it's part of our human condition that we run away from that. And it's a mystery, can't tell you why we do that. I know I do. I know a practical example. There are times when I'm fairly disciplined. At times I may take part of my day and use it in prayer, or the times I might meditate, at times I really intentionally try to focus on being in the presence of God. And invariably, those times can be very meaningful, very centering, very powerful. But then something comes along, I get busy, I get distracted, I might be anxious, and the first thing I do is stop being in the presence of God. Can't tell you why. Why is that? Or I go to a retreat or a conference and I have this meaningful experience of God's presence in my life with others, and in the retreat and meditation and prayer, and it inspires me. It's kind of a mountaintop experience, and then I come back to the real world, and it may last a few days, and I may actually be pretty disciplined in trying to be in God's presence, but then somehow I always find myself fleeing the presence of God. It may be true for y'all. It may be true for all of us. It seems to be a very human thing to do, to run away from God. even when we know it's God's presence that makes our life meaningful. And I know it's a human experience, this fleeing from the presence of God, because if you really read the Bible, if you look at it, people are always running away from God. This God of love and grace and compassion, we run away. The very first story, one of the very first stories in Genesis is the story of Adam and Eve, and they've eaten the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And the first thing they do is they run away and hide. And there's this powerful passage in Genesis where God is walking through the garden and God is calling out and saying, "Where are you? Why are you hiding?" And I think the whole Bible is God wandering through the garden going, "Where are y'all? Why are you hiding?" And the Israelites in the desert, the Israelites in the kingdom running away from God, the prophets trying to woo them back. Remember who you belong to. Quit running away. To Jesus, to the disciples of Jesus, who fall asleep in the Garden of Gethsemane. Talk about running away in Jesus. Or they even run physically away from the cross. To be human is to run away from the presence of God. All of us do that. And I don't know why. Growing up in the Bible Belt, this was back in the 70s. I don't know if they had this in Iowa, but there began to be this kind of fad where people put bumper stickers on their car that said, "I found it." Anybody know what I'm talking about? This must have really been a Texas, Oklahoma thing. It was up here. It was a big fad in the 70s. It was put out by evangelical Christians, and the bumper sticker would say, "I found it." It was kind of mysterious, and soon it began to be a point of conversation, and they said, "Well, I found the Lord. I've said the right words. I've done the right things, and I found the Lord." And I remember even as a young teenager kind of being bothered by that. I was Presbyterian enough that it smacked of works righteousness, but I remember seeing a number of fun bumper stickers that said, "I found it, but I lost it." But my favorite was a bumper sticker in response that simply said, "I was found." Because that's what we believe about a God of grace. It's not that we find God. In fact, left to our own devices, we'll probably run away as fast as we can. But what we believe about God, what Jonah discovered, is you can't get away. One of my favorite psalms, I call it a Presbyterian psalm, Psalm 139. The psalmist understood this. He or she says, "Where can I flee from your spirit? Where can I hide from your presence? If I climb to the very heights of heaven, you are there. If I make my bed even in the pit of death, you are there. If I travel to the farthest limits of the sea, even there, your right hand shall hold me." So I pray for you this week that as you run away, you may be surprised, discover that God found you, has opened the door, and welcomed you home. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.